Hello everyone, welcome to our discussion on the theory of natural selection or Darwinism. In the last part of our discussion on the theory of natural selection, we discussed about the key concepts and also the historical background of this particular theory. And today we are going to discuss the five major points which comes under or with the five major points of the theory of natural selection. So the theory of natural selection is based on the following facts, that is the prodigality of reproduction, struggle for existence, variations, survival of the fittest and natural selection, and origin of species or descent with modification. So it is these five important points that we are going to discuss uh, to understand what is the theory of natural selection. So moving on to the points one by one. The first one is prodigality of reproduction. So this particular theory or the facts of the theory is the five facts of the theory is arranged in a way how the process of natural selection works. So if you see the first one, that is the prodigality of reproduction, it is the phenomenon by which every organism tries to increase its number by reproduction, and that is what is called as prodigality of reproduction. And whenever the number increases, there will be a struggle for space, struggle for food, mate, etc. And that struggle will lead, or that struggle will cause elimination of many organisms or many from that particular population. And the elimination is done based on or the important factors or the in the struggle, those organisms in the population or individuals in the populations who are having some features which is more advanced than the other one, such individuals will be fit to continue in the struggle and continue in that particular environment, and they will survive. So here what happens is those organisms which are fit or having some variations which are favorable is selected by nature, and that is what is called as natural selection. And after natural selection, if you see after many successive generation, in because small adaptations are being added up because of natural selection in every generation, as a result you get an entirely new species after many generation, and that is what is called as the origin of species or descent with modification. The term descent with modification here means that an organism after the process of an organism, if we say we name that organism as A, and that particular organism after successive generation A becomes A1. A1 means one modification is added, A2, two modifications are added, and after 10 generations, we can see that something around 10 modifications might be present in that particular organism. And thus, an organism A, after the process of natural selection, after successive generation, it has descended in the form with modifications as A10. And that is what is called as descent with modification. So we'll discuss each of this fact or each of this particular point one by one. So first one is the prodigality of reproduction. So, as we said earlier, all organisms are having the potentiality of excessive multiplication. So, the reproductive capacity, which is also called as a capacity to produce gametes, is much higher than the number of offsprings that is being produced. So, every time the number of gametes produced will be very, very high when compared to the number of offsprings that is produced by a particular organism. So overproduction is almost universal for every organism. If you take many examples of this prodigality of reproduction, that is one is of paramecium. So paramecium usually undergoes division thrice in 48 hours, and if all the descendants of paramecium survive, the protoplasm of all of all the parameciums would be approximately equal to 10 times of the volume of the earth. So that much will be covered by paramecium if every organism of every offspring survived. So female fruit flies lay eggs which is 200 at a time, and the fly complete their life cycle in 10 to 14 days. If all of them survive and reproduce in 50 days, the number would be around 200 million. The same is the case with elephant, which is a slow breeder, which can produce six young ones in 100 years. And if all young ones of a female survived, there would be 19 million elephants in 750 years. So if you take all these examples, it is clear that even though these organisms are having the potential to produce a huge number of offsprings, that number of offsprings is not usually seen in nature, and that is because of these natural forces which will be acting upon every offsprings, so that not every offsprings will survive in nature, and that number will be kept in check by different factors which will be discussed later. So the next in the cycle is after prodigality of reproduction. When number increases, the increase in number will lead to struggle, because every individual organisms require its own space, its own food for survival, etc. So that will lead to something which is called as a second one, that is struggle for existence. So there is an everlasting struggle or competition for between individuals of the same or of the same species or different species for food, space, mate, etc. So these competition for the necessities of life is usually called as struggle for existence. And there are three types of struggles which are identified. One is intraspecific struggle, which is the struggle between members of the same species. Members of the same species, they have a struggle between them for food because they're having the same food. So there will be a struggle for attaining the food. The second one will be for shelter, because they might be living in the same tree or the same place, etc. So there might be a struggle for shelter, and also there may be struggle for mate, because every organism, as we said, they are trying to increase their number, which is called as prodigality of reproduction. So every organism tries to mate and produce the young ones or its genetic material uh, to be passed on to the next generation. So there is a struggle for these uh, main three necessities of life. And there, apart from this intraspecific struggle, because in nature, uh, all organisms exist or coexist, and because of this coexistence, uh, organisms might share the same food, they might share the same shelter. As a result, there might be something which is called as an interspecific struggle, which is the struggle between members of different species living in the same area, and them that might be for food and for shelter, because they might be sharing a common space, they might be sharing a common food. So when the number of both the organ or both the populations they increase, that also will lead to a struggle. Next is environmental struggle. So environmental struggle is the struggle of individual organism against the odds of the environment, like starvation or the scarcity of food. Next is by drought, by floods. So all the natural calamities are struggle for every individual organism that exists in the environment. So these are the struggles. And what happens is, so every organisms or every individual organism of every population will be having these struggles to exist in the environment. And who will exist, or what is the criteria for an individual to exist in this environment or to consider it as fit to the environment, and that is decided by something which is called as variation or differences. So differences between members of the same species, because no two individuals look alike, even siblings, except identical twins, all individuals are different or they are variants genetically, phenotypically in the sense, if you take a particular group or a particular species, they might have similar features. In that features also there will be differences. For example, take the case of height. We are having The human population is having very different heights. For say, take the examples of our immunity. Not every individual is having the same immunity. It is different. Some are weak, some are healthy, some are intermediate, etc. Some are susceptible to infection, some are less susceptible to infections, etc. So all those are what is called as differences or variations. So differences exist in every trait or every character that you search for. Not only phenotypic, not only genotypic, physiological, morphological, biochemical, in every aspects, variation or difference exists between individuals. So variations can be in size, color, habits, morphology, physiology, etc. So, and depending upon these variations, so every individual is having variation. For say what happens or how natural selection work, we'll take an example. So there is a group of, I take a particular species and there is a group of individuals of a particular species. And as I said, those group is having difference in or difference in this particular immunity level. So now they are going to face a struggle from the environment, and that is a particular, for say, a virus or a bacteria like COVID. They are going to face a virus or a bacteria. So what happens is that the organism, so that was a struggle or an environmental struggle, which is a disease. A spread of a disease is an environmental struggle. So the individuals of that population will struggle. And what happens is that in that particular struggle, as we said, they are having difference in immunity. Those organisms which are immune to that particular disease causing pathogen will survive. All the others will die out, and those individuals which are surviving, so that is a variation. If you take that particular population, if there was 100 individuals in a population and now only five survive after that particular outbreak of that particular disease or that particular pandemic, only five is surviving. So that particular five individuals who are surviving, who are having variations which help them to survive. The others were also variant. Variant in the sense they were having either intermediate or weak immunity. As a result, they were affected with the pandemic and they were dead. But the case with those five individuals who are surviving, they're having a variations which helped them to survive that particular situation. And such individuals will be considered to be fit to survive, or the fittest individuals. And that fittest individuals were selected by nature, because nature and natural force was a disease. It is a natural force. A pandemic is usually considered to be a natural phenomenon. So that particular disease is a natural phenomenon. It can also be man-made, but we are taking it as a natural phenomenon in this example. So that particular disease, which is a natural phenomenon, was the selection pressure. So those or organisms or individuals who could tide over that particular pressure survives, or they become fit. Fit in the sense, those organisms which were immune to that particular pathogen will be having the chance to reproduce and give birth to the young ones, because all the others are dead. So now that particular, so in that particular generation, if you consider that 100 population which was A1, now in that A1, after the natural or after the pressure, now only five individuals are present which are having very high immune system against that particular pathogen. As a result, the generation of the offsprings which comes out of that particular surviving individuals will be 100 percentage resistance to that particular disease. So now the population A2, when you compare with population A1, A1 means that 100 individuals, and now this is the young generation which is immune to that particular pandemic, is different. If you compare the two populations, they are entirely different. One is 100 percentage immune to that particular disease, here only 5 percentage was immune. So now, from if you compare A1 to A2, there is some difference or there is some changes, and this is what is called as descent with modification or origin of species. So, in one generation, no new species is found only after successive generation. I took this example to explain how this changes are being invested in each and every generation. So, coming to the different types of variation, variations can be phenotypic, which is morphological variations, which are not heritable, and it might be genotypic variation, which is changes in the DNA, which is heritable. So this can be continuous or discontinuous. Continuous variations are small variations which show gradations like height, the skin color, etc. So there are variation, but there is a gradation. If you take human population, the height is from 5 feet, for say from 5 feet to 7 feet, which is the normal range. If you take the skin color from white to dark, so that is there is a gradation in that particular change or that particular phenotype. So such variations are called as continuous variation. And coming to discontinuous variation, there are sudden variations that produce extremes of traits without any intermediates. And Darwin called them as saltations, and now it is termed as mutations. So in a population, abruptly one individual is turning into albino. For example, in the case of humans, we have that particular variation from or a continuous trait of skin color from white to dark, and there are certain individuals which stand out of that continuous rate who are albinos. So such extremes of that is an extreme of white, and there is an extreme of what is called as dark, and that is called as hypermelanism. So in both the cases, they are extremes of the normal ones, and such extremes they do not have any gradation. There is no gradation in the albino, like albino with grade one, grade two, etc. Albino is just albino with that particular color. So such changes are usually referred to as saltations or mutations. So coming to favorable variations, they are useful variations to the possessor in the struggle for existence, and unfavorable variations are harmful variation which affect the fitness of the individual. So coming to the fourth point, which is the survival of the fittest and natural selection. This is what I explained in that particular example. So the organisms with the favorable variation in that example, favorable variations was immunity to that particular disease, enable them to meet the challenges of the environment, and they meet the survival or survive the struggle, and those individuals will be considered to be the fittest among the group. So, and that favorable variation will be inherited to the next generations. So, organisms without that particular variation, they will not survive the struggle. They will be weeded out from that particular population. And this particular process of struggle and arrival or the survival of the fittest is what is the result of natural selection. So, natural selection is the differential survival and reproduction of the fittest individual. Elimination of the useless variations is by the action of the environmental factors in nature, like a disease, a flood, then earthquake, whatever natural calamities, etc. So, survival of the organisms with the favorable variations and weeding out of the organisms with unfavorable variations are called is called as the natural selection. And survival of the fittest is the result of this natural selection. So, nature selects the fittest organisms from the group. So the last one is the origin of species and descent with modifications. So new species usually arise by natural selections operating in succeeding generations. So organisms living in a changing environment usually develop suitable variation to suit the new conditions. So organisms that fail to cope up with the changing environment will be eliminated, and that is what is called as the origin of species and descent with modifications. So, with this, we come to the end of our discussion on the five major points on or five major facts of the theory of natural selection. And so, this is the examples of to illustrate natural selection. We will consider two examples here. One is Darwin finches in Galapagos Islands. So, here what happens is that in the case of Galapagos finches, a finch from the mainland, they migrated and they reached the different islands of the Galapagos. So and each island in the Galapagos was very different in their vegetation, their geography, etc. Because all of them were volcanic in origin, so they had entirely different geography, entirely different vegetation, etc. As a result, the finches which survived in that particular environment was those finches which were having a modification in their beak when compared to the normal one which is present in the mainland. And because of that particular vegetation that existed in that particular environment, they diverged into different groups. Because if in a particular for example, if a particular, this one is a cactus eaters, so here in that particular island only cactus was present. So these particular bees, they are not suitable for eating or the cactus eaters. Okay, that particular bee, so those finches which were having these beaks, they might have arrived at that particular island, but they might not survive. So those birds which were having such beaks like this would survive in that island which were having xerophytic plants. As a result, they will multiply, and as a result, after many generations, you will have only such finches in that particular island. So the same is the case with this. Another evidence of natural selection happening in the environment is industrial melanism exhibited by the peppered moth called as the Bistonvitlaria. So this is the example. So this is related to industrial evolution. So before industrial revolution, the moth was this. Okay, you can see this, the bark of the tree. It was after industrial revolution. What happened is that the soot from the industries deposited on the bark. As a result, the bark turned black. And now you can see that this one can be seen by the, or this one can be easily caught by the predator. So before industrial revolution, when the barks were of the this particular moth developed a color which is same as that of the bark of the tree. As a result, this particular moths with this color will be camouflaged from the surrounding. As a result, they will not be easily caught by the predatory birds. But because of saltations, as we discussed, mutations can happen, and in a population, and hypermelanistic moths appear. So this hypermelanistic moth, which will be very less in number, whenever they are formed, they cannot be camouflaged from the background. As a result, they will be easily caught. So that the number of this hypermelanistic moth was very less before industrial revolution. But after industrial revolution, when all the tree barks turned black, what happened is that the other one, which were having the camouflaging ability with the normal tree barks, was now being caught and eaten up by the predatory birds because they lost their camouflaging ability. But the hypermelanistic one, now they escaped from the predator. As a result, the number of the black ones increased. And this is how natural selection works. So that predatory bird is also a natural selecting agent because that is selecting which moth should exist in that environment. So these are the two examples of natural selection. So next is the criticisms, or we'll also discuss this. So this is the difference between the Lamarck's theory and the Darwin's theory. So what Lamarck said in Lamarckism was that uh, all the giraffes were of the same height previously in the older age, or the first giraffes, they were of the same height, and because they overgrazed all the grasses, the grasses were nil in their environment. As a result, they started to reach up higher branches, and because of that desire, or because of that desire for reaching the branches, their necks elongated, and that was the cause, and that resulted, and after many generations, that resulted in the increase in the neck size of giraffes which we see now. So that was the explanation given by Lamarck in Lamarckism. And comparing that with Darwinism, we can see that what Darwin said is that the giraffe population is having a height which is variable, like the human height in human population. So there were giraffes with the larger neck and giraffes with the one which is having short necks. So what happened is that the number of smaller giraffes were more compared to the other one, because the increase in height, or the heighted giraffes were less prominent. The thing was that they will be easily caught by the predator. They will be easily caught by the predator. As a result, the other smaller ones in number increased, and they were in greater number. So what happened was that whenever, because of the overgrazing and increase in number of the smaller ones, they overgrazed, and the same thing was what Lamarck said. The grasses was nil, so there was lack of food. So the smaller ones, because they didn't get any food, they will be weeded out. So that is an environmental struggle. Food, lack of grasses is an environmental struggle. And in that struggle, the short-heighted giraffes, they will die off, and only the giraffes which had a height which could reach the branches, which could reach the trees, will survive. And after many generations, you can see only giraffes which are having the with greater neck size. So this is the difference between Lamarckism and Darwinism. And next is the criticisms to the natural selection theory, or Darwinism, which we'll discuss in the next session. Thanks for hearing.